Hello guys, Dominic again here with another video. Today's going to be different from my usual type of video. Today I'm going to be responding to a video made by HiddenXperia and Wendigoon regarding the esoteric symbolism of Halo. As I think that there's a whole lot of esoteric symbolism in Halo, obviously, but the presentation of Wendigoon, who HiddenXperia presents as an expert in these regards, I think is lackluster. So I'm going to be providing my own explanation, which is going to be far more esoteric and not so reliant on traditional Bible interpretations. So sit back and enjoy my gameplay of Halo while I break down the symbolism of Halo in a more esoteric manner than Wendigoon did. So they first start out with talking about the meaning of the Halo itself, and HiddenXperia describes the Halo rings as a localized reset button that when fired in unison will reset the entire galaxy. Wendigoon provides his interpretation, which he says the halo goes back to Greece and is a symbol of the sun for gods like Helios. And then he goes on about how this would go on to influence religious art, and beings like angels and Jesus would wear them to represent their divinity. And this is not true. The halo does not have its origin in Greece. It actually has its origin in Egypt, with gods like Ra and Horus representing the sun themselves. And here it isn't so much a badge of goodness or divineness. It is a literal symbol that represents the source of life and destruction, just like the halo rings, which are said to destroy life and contain life within them for study. So under this sense, the Halo rings in the Halo games represent the sun, and when they fire, it represents a solar flare resetting civilization. So it isn't this symbol of divinity, it isn't this symbol of goodness to represent angels that are beyond humans. It's a symbol for life and death itself, and the halo's firing represents a solar flare, which does have the potential to reset civilization here on this earth. So when all the halos are fired in unison, it would essentially be like a yuga. So there are different levels of resets, as they described. When a halo ring fires, it only destroys a certain part of the galaxy. We can see this here, where when a certain cataclysm happens, it only affects people in a specific area. But if there was a great reset, such as described in the Hopi myths, where the world is literally wiped out by fire, or it's wiped out by ice or water, this is something that's going to reset the whole world and make life start over again in a fashion similar to when all the halo rings fired and the whole galaxy had to start over again. Now, I think that Wendigoon shied away from the sun cult narrative because that would imply that his religion, Christianity, is actually a sun religion in disguise. So he points to the art and the other exoteric interpretations, when originally, no, the halo is not from Greece. It is from Egyptian mythology, representing Horus and Ra, and the life-giving potential and the destruction potential that they inhabit as gods. Now, the second point they make, and I'll address, regards the Master Chief himself. Wendigoon tries to tie the Master Chief to specific Bible verses, John 1:17 and John 11:7. And I think he completely misses the point of those Bible verses. Either he doesn't really know the story of Halo, or he doesn't understand the Bible. And I'm going to assume it's the former. Furthermore, I don't understand why you would jump straight for these verses anyway, but I'm going to get into those in a minute. What I think the Master Chief really is he is a representation of the chief cornerstone of the Great Pyramid itself. He is the being who has mastered his will. So he is the stone the builders rejected. And this is even described in Psalms 118. Basically, the Master Chief is the temple or the pyramid. And through mastering his will, he has completed the construction of alignments where he can balance the forces between chaos and order. Okay, this is what the pyramid is supposed to do. However, the pyramid in reality does have more deceitful purposes, but that's a totally another topic. The Master Chief, though, is the living embodiment of truth, which I'll get into in a minute. But first, the Master Chief is a representation of the player, and he represents the will that, or the potential that we all have through mastering our will just as he has. So his superpower, besides luck, is essentially that he never quits. That's his will. He keeps pushing forward until whatever needs to be solved has been solved. And this is to signify that we as individuals, because we are the players and the Master Chief is a representation of the player, we have the potential to bring true change in this world in a fashion similar to the Master Chief. Okay? So the Master Chief is the truth incarnate because he has mastered his will to bridge the forces of chaos and order together. And if we choose to become the truth incarnate ourselves, we can do the same thing and have a tremendous amount of impact in the world. So the Master Chief is the chief cornerstone because he has mastered his will, and he represents the potential of every one of us. Furthermore, he tries to tie the Master Chief to John 1:17, which John 1:17 states that the law came through Moses and the truth it comes through Christ. So what this essentially means and how this verse relates to Halo is the prophets are Moses. The prophets are the ones who have the laws. They're the ones who use their secularist religious governments to essentially coerce everyone into following their ways, regardless of if their ways are actually good for other beings or not. And this is exactly what the Pharisees were doing, who had the laws of Moses. Oh, there's a fire truck. I don't know if it's catching in the audio. But the Pharisees are the embodiments of the law of Moses in Jesus' time. So when it says that Christ is the truth, this means that Jesus Christ and his entire existence goes against the very laws of Moses, which restrict individuals to being sinners, which is exactly what the prophets do. They want everyone They want to equate everyone to basically being imperfect life forms who need their guidance. And the Master Chief, since he is a human being and the reclaimer, he is the living embodiment of the covenant truth. This means that just by him being in the presence of the prophets or the covenant members destroys their religion, whether they realize it or not. Just like Jesus Christ being in the presence of the Pharisees and Sadducees destroyed their laws. And I have to think that they probably did realize that to an extent, but they didn't care because they had a lot of power to maintain and a lot to lose if Jesus ended up being or proving himself. Just like the prophets of Halo, they have a lot to lose if the covenant finds out that the humans are actually the forerunners, which is what Bungie originally had intended. And they would realize that the one who they call demon is actually their savior. Furthermore, Wendigoon also tries to interpret John 11:7, which that Bible verse states, let us go into Judea again. Jesus says this. And Wendigoon's response to this Bible verse is, good luck with that one, insinuating that there's no way that you can connect Halo to this Bible verse. And he's totally wrong. Because this literally happens in the story of Halo, which again leads me to my point. Either he doesn't know about Halo or he doesn't know about the Bible. So when Jesus says, let us go into Judea again, he's going to Judea, which is the heart of the Pharisees and Sadducees, the false prophets. And he's going there to wage spiritual warfare with them, even though they just tried to stone him not that long ago, just before this. Essentially, they want to kill Jesus. But Jesus, through his bravery and his will, his mastered will, is still going to go into the den of the lions of Judea and confront them. And this is exactly what the Master Chief does in Halo. There's a level where he literally goes straight to High Charity, which is basically the Judea of Halo, to confront the false prophets. Okay? Or confront the false Sanhedrin, or the High Council. He's not going there because he feels safe or because he wants some sort of kumbaya. He's going there to wage war. As Jesus said, he brings the sword to divide. So, in the Halo game, it is the Gravemind who is the main bad guy who sends the Master Chief to High Charity. But then there's another level in Halo 3 where he goes to High Charity willingly to retrieve Cortana. And Cortana is basically the anima of him, if you were to equate it to a Jungian archetype. Or you could even equate it to a Christ-like figure descending into the underworld to retrieve Sophia, or the divine or sacred wisdom. So he's going straight to the heart of the enemy to confront them, to retrieve the anima, or the sacred feminine. So for this third part, they mention the covenant and the meaning of the covenants, and they go on a little bit about the Ark. And Wendigoon says that the covenant is all about things like the covenant between God and Abraham and how God has blessed his lineage. And then he also tries to connect the Ark of the Covenant to Halo. which he does not. He even says that he doesn't think there's anything there regarding a connection between the Ark of the Covenant and Halo. Mainly because I don't see one either. I don't even know why he mentioned it. It's kind of like him mentioning the Bible verses. But anyway, he is right about covenant in the sense of Abraham and his family. However, basically what a covenant is a contract. It's a legalistic trap that's basically been signed in ignorance. So it revolves around people here on the earth, or people living in the material universe. They want things that they can't get from this material universe. So they form a covenant or a contract with beings who are higher, or seemingly higher on the spiritual hierarchy than they are, and they come to some sort of agreement in the sense that Abraham's going to obey God and do pretty much whatever God says, and in exchange God will bless his lineage. So the prophets in Halo are essentially intermediaries between the Forerunners, mainly their technology, and the rest of life or intelligent life in the galaxy. Because every species the Covenant comes across, they try to incorporate into their empire through war and coercion. So basically, the prophets see themselves as the highest forms of life in the entire galaxy. So the prophets and the covenants, through their ways which are inherently unnatural, have created a terrible life for themselves. Rather than try and actually fix the problems that they've created by reflecting on the way they've lived and make changes, they instead take a salvationist method and mindset of, well, if it's so messed up, let's just leave it all behind in the first place. And the way they want to do that is by activating the halo rings, which they think is going to grant them salvation. However, they essentially want all the rewards of enlightened spiritual beings without actually doing any of the work required to become an enlightened spiritual being themselves. And I have to think that the covenant is pretty similar to Christianity, and even similar to what Wendigoon is talking about in the video. You see, Christians themselves are salvationists. They don't want to have to fix themselves and be a better person. All they want to do, or what they've been told to do, is just believe in Jesus and not actually have to do any of the work that Jesus did. And this is essentially what the covenants are trying to do, because they want the rewards of what they think is an ascended race in the Forerunners without actually having to reach the level the Forerunners were at in the first place. They don't want any sort of responsibility. They want a great journey to escape the mess that they've created for themselves. Now, for the next points I want to address, I'm going to talk about them in unison, because I think that you kind of have to. They go on about the Ark and the flood, and they say that these two are not subtle at all. As in, when you read the Bible and when you look at Halo and see the ark and the flood, it's obvious the correlation between the two. The problem is that the story the Bible gives us of these events doesn't have much to do with the historical events that they're based off of. But the Bible does get some things right. So, the flood, they are the bad guys, but it's not really their fault. They're kind of like this anti-force of life. In Halo, you have the Forerunners. And the Forerunners would basically be the Atlanteans, or the archetypes that represents the Atlanteans. And the Atlanteans were the technological civilization on the earth who were more advanced than the other beings. And the precursors, which they don't mention the precursors in the video, but in order to understand the flood, you have to mention the precursors. The precursors are basically what you would call the Lemurians. And the Lemurians were the species on the earth who, unlike the Atlanteans who relied on their technology, the Lemurians were totally in balance with nature and the world around them. So, in Halo, you have a technologically reliant species that is eliminating the species who is in tune with their natural environment, mostly out of fear. The flood is a result of that trauma. So they're essentially a bastard child born from the war and genocide of the precursors at the hands of the Forerunners. And the precursors, I think they would turn to dust, and this dust would go on to become the flood. And the Forerunners, they would essentially just, I think they would write this out of their history. It's like, oh, we didn't really do that. We aren't really that bad of people. But they actually are that bad of people. And so the precursors, they gave the Forerunners the exact gift that they deserved. Because the Forerunners are a lot more like the flood than you might imagine. The Forerunners are basically a technological hive mind who serves the ecumene, or their empire, and their empire's whole goal is to go out into the galaxy and subdue it and extract more resources for their technological means. So the flood mirrors the Forerunners in the sense that the Forerunners, they're this all-consuming force who are bound by laws that they obey in a hive mind-like fashion. The flood is there to consume their technology and show the Forerunners, this is actually the monsters that you are. And since the Forerunners are, or not the Forerunners, the flood are a hybrid between the precursors and the Forerunners born out of war, the flood would represent the Nephilim. So the flood is not the water that comes and drowns the world. The flood is the reason the world needs to get drowned in the first place. So in the biblical context, the Nephilim are essentially hybrids between humans and fallen angels. So they basically disturbed just by existing the natural order of the world, because they're a mix between angels and humans. And this basically disturbed God, and God did not like it. And this is why God initiates the flood, to wipe out the hybridization which had taken place on the earth. However, in the context of Halo, the forerunners are the ones who initiate the reset. And if you read the older myths, such as the myth of Unapistem or Atrahasis, it's going to say that Enlil basically flooded the earth. And Enlil, or whoever these gods were, would have basically been the Atlanteans. So under this context, it's just the forerunners or the Atlanteans. They are activating the halo rings to clean up their mess. They're not doing it to save life or preserve life. They're doing it because they messed up and they don't want to actually have to face the problem that they created. Similarly to the covenant. So the flood, they aren't some random disaster or a divine punishment. They're just a cosmic reaction to a crime that was committed by the forerunners. So also, under this interpretation, the ark itself in Halo is not a benevolent mechanism designed to save life or preserve life. It's about destroying the mess that the forerunners created so that the galaxy can be rebooted and continue essentially the same ways that the forerunners started through organizations like the Covenant and even the UNSC. So the final thing I'm going to address is them discussing the apocalypse. HiddenXperia says that the apocalypse within the context of Halo just revolves around the Covenant destroying humanity and then eventually the flood, the greater apocalypse coming in. And then Wendigoon gives his interpretation, and he goes on about the rapture and the second coming, and it's hotly debated of which John received the revelation. And he ultimately says that the apocalypse is about the end of humanity when we return to God. And this is just false. Because the word apocalypse, when you translate it etymologically, has nothing to do with the end of things. It has to do with the unveiling. That's what the word apocalypse means. So how this relates to Halo is the Master Chief would essentially be the apocalypse itself. It's not the Covenant, and it's not the flood. If the apocalypse is the unveiling, and that is the revealing of the truth, and the Master Chief is the living embodiment of the truth, he is the apocalypse. He is the force which unveils the false paradigms and religions. If you notice the Master Chief, he doesn't negotiate. He doesn't plead with the enemy. He just shows up and goes from there by acting in the world. So once this final truth is realized, it will be the end of something, but it won't be the end of humanity or even the grunts or the elites or the jackals. It would be the end of the Covenant, the end of the flood, and even the end of the UNSC, because all these things are false paradigms. And since the Master Chief is the living embodiment of truth, and as I said, he reflects our potential as individuals. Only we, once we've mastered our will, can restore balance in the physical reality which we all inhabit. So apocalypse is not the ending of all things. It's just the ending of this cycle so that we can start a new cycle altogether instead of continuing the cycle of repeating what the Atlanteans or what the Forerunners brought to us. Furthermore, this is why I said earlier in the video that I think Wendigoon sounds more like the Covenant than someone like the Master Chief, because he thinks that the apocalypse is the end of things where it's just all done, when humanity never solved any of our problems. We never did the work. All we are doing is seeking a salvation from our problems, just like the Covenant. And this is the false paradigm which needs to end. This is the falsity that should be unveiled, and that living embodiments of truth, just like the Master Chief in the context of the Halo games, or Jesus Christ in the context of the biblical scriptures, destroys just by simply existing. These beings who are in alignment with truth destroy false paradigms just by existing, because the way that they're living is basically an example that shows everyone we don't need the liars of the prophets telling us how to live, when there's people like this, Jesus, who are doing so great without their lies, without their laws. And I'm going to end it on this Bible verse here. John 14:12-14. It says, "Very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than these, because I am going to the Father. And I will do whatever you ask in my name, so the Father may be glorified in the Son. You may ask me for anything in my name, and I will do it." This is Jesus Christ right here saying that we are capable of doing things just like he did, and even greater. And so with that, guys, that's my video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys again.